we're getting ready to identify some of it now. So I think what we'll do is stop identifying or stop sorting, and then we're going to do some identification so we can see what these things are. So I'm going to take the original tubs and consolidate them. No, I want the other one that had the, or is this it? Oh, okay. You want to, so I guess we'll get some of these out of the way and just work on the whole ones.
Okay.
All right.
Grab my books too.
You better grab it.
Grab this.
Yeah. All right, now we're going to take a look at what we got, hopefully. And since it's going to be easiest to do it with the hole points, that's the one we're going to grab. I'm going to grab a little assortment. Well, let's see. The only... Oh, there's a little one.
Okay.
So what we've got is we have arrowheads, knives, and adzes. So, and a few other things mixed in. And since this is a multi-component site, everybody lived there from paleo hunting mastodons all the way down to Mississippian. And probably some Oneota in here too. And then we have historic, the wine bottles and all that stuff from the Camp family that lived there. Their dump was across the street, right at the edge of the field. So most of those bottle tops and things like that I found there. And if they had plowed the dump, which is over the hill, I probably would have found a lot more there. But the Indians also had a dump there. I came out one time to hunt the field, and Mr. Campmeyer had just plowed. And this is when they did the old moldboard plow that turns everything over. And I counted 35 pits that I could see that the Indians had dug those pits because they were folded over like that. And that's right next to that, maybe 50 feet away, was an old trench that had eroded, and they filled that with artifacts and most junk. So there are individual things that you can tell by surface hunting that you may not recognize that the field is in cultivation. So I went right after big rains. That's why you'll see a bunch of the dates on them are going to be maybe for 2 or 3 weeks after a 5-inch rain. I'd be in there like crazy. And then not in there again for another 2 years if we had a drought. So the idea is that you're trying to hunt while you can see what's going on. The archaeologists don't have that, that ability, I guess, because they have to hunt it as they see it. Because if they get a contract, they have to go out and hunt it if it's covered with grass or if it's plowed. So as us amateurs, we have a better chance to get out there. This is about 2 miles from my house. So when it rained, everything else went out the window. Kids, family, I went out there and hunted arrowheads. So that's why my kids are the way they are today. So, but this is at least 50 years, maybe 52 years of hunting the same 15-acre field. So this is a very small area, and to have this much debris, I also have that much at home that I didn't mark. So it wasn't till about 1970 I started marking the artifacts. And if I didn't have time to wash them, I'd put them in a bag and save those bags. So when I was getting this ready, that's what I was doing, is going through bags that hadn't been opened for 35, 40, maybe 50 years. So it's like rediscovering them all over again. So we want to get into it.
Well, one thing that Larry mentioned about labeling them, that's something we always encourage people to do if you are a collector, that you document some way the sites. Don't necessarily put everything you found into a cigar box or into one big container. Separate them and maybe assign a name or a number. So this came from my site number 42 or something. And as you can see, he's written those numbers on these pieces. So that's helpful not only for him to record, but also working with archaeologists. They know these things all came, first of all, from Larry and from one particular site. And so it's important to do some documentation if you're going to be serious about collecting.
And early on, I didn't know any of this. So my documentation was the initial for the K for campfire, and then the date that I found it. So a lot of them you're going to see just the K, because I had it in a bag, but it never had the date on the bag. But I know it came from that site. So just having some way to put it back to that site is important. The dates don't really mean a whole lot. It's just that to me, it meant that I was active during that time. I didn't really know, and what I did is I kept with it because I had started out doing it that way. Mm-hmm. So, what do you want to get to first?
Okay. Well,
What was the location?
Caseyville, above the bluff in Caseyville. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, a couple of the items he has in here are adzes. These are woodworking tools, and they would be tied onto a handle at right angles, probably with rawhide, and used to, shape a spear shaft or shape a log or a handle for another tool. They were usually, when they're thick like this, mostly from the Archaic period, would you say?
Yep.
And which would probably put them anywhere from 7,000 to 8,000 BC up to about maybe 1,000 BC or so. And you want to talk about the color?
Yeah, this is the flint. Being a modern Flintknapper, I go and get this flint all the time over in High Ridge, Missouri. And I can show you within 50 feet of where this color flint comes from. Hunted so much flint over there. So that's kind of neat to combine the flint knapping along with the arrowhead hunting. And then these adzes too are, we built that canoe using stone adzes a couple years ago. And we learned an awful lot about how not to haft stone tools. And we learned a little about how to haft them, but we learned a lot more about not hafting them. If you'll notice, there's polish on this. I don't know if I can get it right. You'll see polish on it. And there's no polish on the bit because it's been reworked, but up above the bit, it's polished. And that's from being used in the wood. As a carpenter, if you cut wood, you cut across the grain, you use a crosscut saw. If you go with the grain, you use a rip saw. This is the same thing. You use stone axes to go across the grain. Adzes are with the grain. So it's just like modern carpentry, to tell you the truth. I'm looking under exotic arrowheads for the little ones, and you can see there's a lot of problems with the notches. That's what tells us where they're from or what age they are. And there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of poor flint knappers that can't make the notches the same way. So you have to take that into account as you're working it too. So which one do you want to do next? I know what this one is. That actually is a come on now, Larry.
Well,
shoot. It's Adena. I think that's an Adena there.
Well,
I have to double check.
I would not call that an Adena.
I know. I didn't either.
It's in some ways it looks like a Snyder's point, but the notches are narrower.
And the Adena is usually stemmed.
Yeah, Adena would be. I don't know if we've got one.
Could you hold it up in our direction so we can see what
Yeah.
But more of the contracting stems like that would be more like for an Adena or even something like that. But
that's what other thing about these books is you pretty well almost have to know what the point is to be able to find it in the book. So that's one of the problems is how do you write these books?
Yeah.
What they did with this one is they made it like stem points and notch points, and that gives you a hint where to start. Perino is all alphabetical. So if you want a Snyder's, you can just look up S.
You have to know.
But you got to know what it is before you can double check it.
Yeah.
This one was interesting because they had plowed it. There were 2 points almost exactly alike, and he had just plowed, and it turned it over, and I saw that much sticking out of the ground, and I took my probe and probed the other piece that broke. I couldn't find that little piece there, but sometimes you can do that. If you can tell that it's a fresh break, you can keep looking and find the other part. That's really rare, however. So what we'll go with that one.
Well,
Snyder's variant.
It looked kind of like a turkey tail.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Yeah. And if you look at the book here, most of them are bigger, but they've got that kind of. If you ever dressed a turkey for Thanksgiving, they got that funny looking little tail on them. That's where the name came from. But it has that kind of constricted notch and pointed base to it, kind of like you see here. So this probably would have been initially a much bigger piece, but it's been reworked quite a bit from its original size. And that's mostly early woodland period, which would be roughly from 1000 BC to about 300 AD or so in that time.
The turkey tails, most of them are down south,
Yeah.
Kentucky, Tennessee, that way, and southern Illinois and southern Indiana. Many of them, the caches that Perino found on the bluffs above Caseyville, there were 13 in one, I think 10 in another, and they're usually found with cache blades. They're, I don't know if I got a cache blade here handy. Not really. Something like that, except this one's broken, but and then the cache blades will have one turkey tail with them, which is something that's made, most of them are made out of Kentucky hornstone, and so you'll have these white cache blades with one turkey tail with it. Now, Val Haskins worked in Kentucky, and she had a guy come in with this little point about that big, and she couldn't figure out what it was, and finally they agreed to call it the Haskins stub. And what it was the bottom of the turkey tail. That little diamond part was broken off, so we have a running joke with her with the Haskins stub.
Yeah, and like you're saying, most of them are made out of this sort of grayish colored type of chert or flint. And
that's from Corydon, Indiana, in that area. So it's is considered a somewhat exotic flint here, but it's carried in during that time period and hardly any other time period.
Yeah.
You'll get a lot. Some of the stuff will show up from Kentucky up here, but the stuff that they're using mostly is a Burlington flint from the St. Louis area. Runs from Burlington, Iowa, to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and 150 miles either side of that. But it outcrops here and there. It's not on the other side of the river. It runs all the way, but on this side of the river, it's hard to see.
There's what we're talking about, turkey tails.
And the way I think they're hafted, many of them are really thin. I think you find a
Yeah.
piece of wood that's curved or an antler, and you gouge a groove in the antler, and you stick the tip of the turkey tail in the top, and then you tie the back down. So you're only using one edge of the knife, and then you turn it over when it gets dull. Do the same thing that way. Very unusual way to haft, but they're so delicate they have to be supported. So that's the only way I can really figure out. So as you're looking at these things, you're trying to figure out how they're hafted. What happens when you have to gouge or an adze? You always have to have wood at the top of the tool. That's why it's blunt. And you have the wood hang over the top, so when you're chopping, none of it is on the stresses on the lashings. It's all on the wood. If you put the stress on the lashings, it'll break right away.
This one we call a hardened barbed, and here's examples of some of those and some of the variation. Some of them have shorter bases or stems on them. But you'll notice on this one, if you look at it from the end, you can see it's kind of beveled. There's bevel this way, and then this one bevels this way. This is from resharpening. So this started out as a bigger point. Probably, maybe it may have been a spear point, but this is used more like a knife. And as they used it, the edges got dull, and they'd resharpen them. They would take the pointed end of a deer antler, and they would press flakes off on this side here, then turn it over, press flakes off on this side, and that creates that beveling. And that's very characteristic of a lot of the early archaic spear points and knives. Like here's one that could almost, it's not quite a hardened, but
Yeah, I've been trying to figure that out for the last 40 years.
It's kind of like a lost lake, but it's been beveled, as you can see, as well. So again, that's very characteristic of those early archaic points.
And we had some of these, I don't see any there. I saw a couple in here. Well, now that I see them, I don't see them. Yeah, we had the lady that had some Matanzas.
Yeah.
This is a Matanza point. They're thick, very little notches. And they're usually, late to middle archaic. Mm-hmm. So they're 5,000-6,000 years old.
Yeah.
So I as a kid, I ran across lots of thick arrows, but I thought they were just thick because they were too thick as a kid. But that's a certain style.
Oh yeah. Now an Etley knife is very crude, but to get that big, I mean, they're it's amazing. And they're prolific, especially in Missouri. Yeah, almost every site in Missouri's got Etley points on it. So just because it's crude doesn't mean it can't be a decent point. And believe me, I looked at that stuff a lot too. If you look at Etley points, it's a series of about 5 or 6 points. The Osceola, the red ochre blades. There's 5 or 6 other ones that are made the same with the same preform. So what they did is they would take a bunch of flint and they would make the preform out of it. I got my poster. I didn't think I had one. Mm-hmm. So the preform is the point without notches. Yeah. And they're getting ready to make something that fits for what they're doing. So they would take these pieces of flint and bury them in the ground, and they would look something like these. So the important part of the arrowhead or the knife is not the flint, it's the handle. The handle takes 5 to 10 times longer to make because it's going to be antler. It's going to be a strong handle. It lasts for generation after generation. So what happens when you're out butchering the deer, and you break your knife, the point is going to stay where the deer is. You're going to bring the handle back to the village, unwrap the sinew, and then dig up one of those blades and then make it exactly to fit that handle. So what's happening is that's why points have the same handles for generations, thousands of years sometimes. So what you do if you have, at that point they have 7 different types of points that will all fit the same, you can shape them to fit that handle, in other words. So what they're doing is, if somebody from another village, you say, okay, right next to that tree, that's where I buried him. They'll go over there and they can take it and make something that fits their handle. So if you make all the points first, then if you can't make it adapt it to your handle. With them, it was easier to work the stone than it was to work the antler. So that's why you made the caches, dig them up. That's what we were just talking about, the caches that have one turkey tail with them. That's what they do. This is an old poster that we made for Archaeology Month in Missouri. And this was one piece of flint that was, I think 12, 14 pounds. And then I made all of these points. That's all 7 of those types are made out of that one piece of flint. And then there's like 300 other stone tools around there that came from the debitage of making the point. And then the outside is all the trash that was left over. So it was a great way for me to figure out how they got all these out of the same pre-farm. So I made the same pre-farms and then made the points from those pre-farms. So you can do a lot with one nodule of flint, make a lot of different tools. Many of these scrapers you can see in here, the simple tools that you can make. Yeah.
The purpose of burying them, was that safekeeping, like putting it away so someone didn't steal it?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know, have any of you heard about the dirt ball cache at Cahokia Mounds? It's an old story, and it's probably baloney. But the guy was putting in his septic tank down here at the Mounds, near the Mounds, and he found a bunch of clay balls. And he wanted to get the septic tank in, so they hauled that dirt away, and he sits down to have a beer after they're done, and there's one of those clay balls sitting there, and he took it, threw it down, had 33 Cahokia points. Beautiful, burial quality Cahokia points. And so what a great way to carry flint and protect it, is to bury it or put it in something like that. So if they were transporting really fine arrowheads that would chip, I mean, even if they fall off of anything, they're going to chip. Put them in a dirt ball.
So they don't have jewelry boxes and tissue paper like
That's right. And they still get chipped.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, I think they had little tricks like that, for hauling different things. And, when you got done, you just put it in some water and there's your beautiful points. Not a thing wrong with them. So, okay. Which one do you got?
What do you want to do with that?
That's what I was looking at. And I was thinking Lost Lake, but I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, there's several different things that have those. This one called a Charleston. Oops. Show it's got those deep corner notches, but it's an earlier archaic variety, about 7,000 BC or so. But there's something similar that I found here. There's also something called a Campsville barbed, which looks very similar too,
Yeah.
and that's a much later time period.
Campsville with a C?
With a
K.
K.
Oh, that's a K.
Yeah. So a lot of times it's hard to tell. And a lot of it's different skills of the Flintknapper, regional variations of the same kind of thing. So a lot of times you just don't really know for sure. We make our best guess.
I ain't nowhere near that. I can't find it in here in Lost Lake. Let me try it in one of the other books. And there's another problem. And here's 4 volumes. So you got to know which volume to look at first. And so it's, you can see when you see a finished report with thousands of artifacts in it, and they had to go through this for every one of those points. So it's a lot of, after a while you get to know what the points are, then it makes it a lot easier. You can just look them right up, supposedly.
And people, when they classify points, a lot of times we have what we call lumpers and splitters. Lumpers would put a lot of different things under a category. Splitters that have a different name for each little variation in the notching or the size or the width. And so it gets confusing sometimes when you're going through some of these reports, and when you're trying to identify something.
Joe, that one book that you were the author of, you had those for sale?
This one is sold through the Cahokia Mounds gift shop. Now, of course, the museum and the gift shop are closed, but they are open online.
You got that one.
So if you're interested in, this book is one I did. It's all kinds of everything from the drills and adzes and scrapers, ceremonial pieces, and there's identifications by period of the different point types, then the groundstone tools, etc.
What do you think of this, Lost Lake?
There we go.
So online where? At the Mounds or at
Yeah, CahockiaMounds.org. We'll take you to the
So I'll
website.
hold her up here, and that's a Lost Lake.
Yeah.
Took us a while to find it. But, and I think that's early archaic or early middle archaic.
And this one could be that as well, Larry. But
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. Yeah. Okay. I'll go for that.
yeah.
Now this one's beveled. Well, this one isn't beveled. That hasn't been resharpened much. That's a bit, Larry. This is also out of Fern Glen Flint. You don't see much. Turns purple and green, and it comes from around Columbia, Illinois. But that does look like a Lost Lake also. So we got a few of them.
Lost Lake describes a place, or
Somebody gave it a name.
Yeah, somebody gave it a name.
Maybe the first one that was found was at a place called Lost Lake. Who knows?
Yeah, the Matanzas Point is named after the Matanzas beach site up on the Illinois River. So Hardin is also for Hardin, Illinois. Thebes for Thebes, Illinois. So a lot of them, Karnak, the old Little Egypt. We got Karnak and we got Thebes and we got, what was the other one? Cairo, yeah. So it kind of gives you an idea what you have to go through to write these reports. And what Bill can call one point, I can call another. You saw that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really difficult to do this. The thing is that you need to be consistent. So if you're identifying a point, that Lost Lake, that other Lost Lake, okay, but you need to be consistent with that. Somebody else may call it something else, and it would fit into their project too.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
and for both of you, you were talking about the turkey tail being kind of fragile, and you were talking about the other one being reworked as a knife. Is there something to tell you that something is a spear point or a knife point? Or is that interchangeable?
Size is pretty much it. If you get oversized, you wouldn't be throwing it on a spear. It's going to be head heavy and dive into the ground. But the bigger bits, you can almost bet that they're a knife. But when you get down to the lower stuff, it's an idea of what will fly and what won't fly.
We talked to someone earlier today. The spear point, for 10,000 years, the Indians didn't have bows and arrows. So almost all these things you're seeing here are not bows, are not arrows, but except maybe a few of the little tiny ones. Most of them are spear points or knives. When I say that, when you think about and you're using an atlatl or a spear thrower to propel your spear. You hit the deer or the animal, then you can pull the shaft off, and then the spear point becomes a knife for butchering. So they're multi-purpose tools. The ones with all the beveling on them, most likely, were primarily knives. Like here's a hardened point that I showed you earlier that has beveling. Here's another one. It's been worked down more and more from what the original size. But originally, this was probably longer and wider when it was first made. And maybe it was a spear point initially, but again, it's been reused for multiple purposes. And I think that's why in the book here, I intended to, did I say it? Let's see. Late archaic spear points / knives. So,
Yeah.
my butt.
Can you show how that fits together for the camera? Camera's kind of getting like the backs of their heads in some cases and not.
Okay.
Well, I got a nice
Okay.
back of my head.
We got lots of pictures.
Well, I'm trying to find the one that had the spear thrower in it,
Then,
because that was my spear thrower that I made for that project too. Anyway, the points that it's going to use on a spear are much bigger than the point you would use on an arrow. This little arrow point here is very typical. So most arrow points are about 1 inch long, but there's a big controversy going on now. They think the arrow points come in about 400 AD, and before that they were spear points that you could put on that ladle. So right now that's one of the main focuses, is they're trying to figure out the difference between a small spear point and a large arrow point. And it's really tough.
Yeah.
Because when does the bow and arrow come in?
you know,
It's my theory. Oh,
yeah, like he was saying, around 400 or 500 AD, we stopped seeing a lot of these big points. There are all these little things, from like a ½ inch up to 1.5 inches would be the typical range for an arrow point. If you think about it, you can't have something this big and heavy on the end of an arrow and shoot with any accuracy or distance. It'd be too heavy. So it's not the size of the point that's so important, it's the power behind it. And that's what the bow provides. It was a more effective and efficient weapon. These worked, but it's very much an acquired skill.
yeah.
To stand out in the woods, waiting for a deer to come by and try not to scare him when you're cocking it and throwing it, So, but with a bow and arrow, you can hide a little more effectively.
I was a world champion in 1983 when there were only about 7 or 8 archaeologists throwing these things. Now it's international competition. And I won the competition by hitting one of those big round bales. They had 3 of them. And it was so windy out in Wyoming that when I threw it to one bale, it blew it over and hit the bullseye on the other. So that's why I won it. But today, if you're in an international competition, where the TV screen is, if you can't hit a paper plate 4 out of 5 times, you may as well not even get in the competition. And these things are hard to use. So Dawn Wagner was the first woman to take a white-tailed deer in Missouri. Her husband was the first man to take a white-tailed deer with it. They have an atlatl season in Missouri, and they don't have it in Illinois. But Eric Smith took a 110-pound doe about 5 years ago with a stone point, and he just missed his turkey last year. Went right over the back of it. But we're starting to hunt with that, and the Department of Conservation from Missouri, probably DNR or something like that now, didn't want to go along with this, but now that they see how clean a kill that they make, that's perfectly fine. And there's so few people that do it. Dawn now has a license. She works for DNR, out in Truxton, Missouri, and she has a license to hunt nuisance animals in her garden. So she gets bunny rabbits with the spear thrower like this. She is really amazing gal.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for you to see from where you are, but this is an illustration of an atlatl that's used to propel the spear. But again, it's something that takes quite a bit of experience to become efficient at it. But it's called an atlatl. I think is an Aztec term.
word for
The Aztecs, the Eskimos, and people in New Guinea and other places were still using atlatls during the historic period. But mostly in North America, it was replaced by the bow and arrow. And the bow and arrow is also used in those other places.
There it is. This is a
Yeah.
diorama. That's my atlatl and dart in there up in the museum in Northern Illinois anyway. And so it's a good hunting weapon, used much longer than the bow and arrow. So over in Europe, they're 100,000 years old and younger. What was I going to say about that is that, most people think that the bow and arrow came from the atlatl. I don't. Because when I was a kid, my dad wanted some Hassenpfeffer. And in order to make Hassenpfeffer, we had to get a bunch of rabbits. So my uncle over in St. Louis, a city boy, came over and said, hey, I'm going to show you how to make a rabbit trap. I figured this guy doesn't know anything. He's raised in the city. Well, he knew rabbit traps. So I made a rabbit trap, 11 of them. And when I'd slop the hogs in the morning, I'd slop them up at the cow barn and then run through the woods and check my traps and then slop them at the horse barn. And in the evening, I'd slop them at the horse barn and go back the other way, check my traps. And I ended up getting 22 rabbits farming. But what it did is I had trouble all my life trying to figure out species of trees. And I found out by making those traps what trees were best for making bows. So I would bend the tree down, and in the winter, if I use an elm, the sap would freeze and it would go that far and then stop. So elm isn't good for bowwoods because temperature makes a big difference. So, and it's so tough to work with. But osage, wow, it went like crazy. And hickory was the easiest one because they were nice thin shoots. So I kind of figured that I learned about trees from not the Boy Scouts, but my own personal interaction. And then I realized that that's about the time, about 1000 BC, when you don't see atlatls anymore. And we go to bows and arrows about 1,000 years later. So what the heck is going on? Well, what happens is 1000 BC is when they start making pottery and start building homes and settling down in certain areas rather than being completely nomadic. So think about that, living that lifestyle. What's the best way to get game? Trapping. You can be sitting there making pots and flint-knapping and all this, and your traps are working for you out in the woods. So, but that taught you what trees bend. And that's what got you into the bows and arrows later on. You knew which trees were perfect for power. So to me, that explains why the bows and arrows are separated from the atlatls, because it's a different type of environment that you want to get in. And believe me, these people got everything from their environment. They knew it much, much better than we'll ever will. So.
It is 20 till. We need to wrap up at 10 till. We have to be out of here by 8, so I don't know how long it'll take you.
Yeah, I think it's probably time to wrap it up then. I want to thank you all for coming. Oh, yeah.
Are you going to have a program on your canoe coming up?
I don't know.
Don't know.
Yeah, somebody, Julie Zimmerman had somebody that was going to have me do the program, and I haven't heard back from them yet. So
Tell them what you did with the canoe, the real short.
we made a 23-foot dugout canoe with all stone tools 2 years ago. We cut down the tree in my front yard, 100-foot, tulip poplar. We cut it down in 3 days. We had blisters within the first 20 minutes. Then we brought the tree up to Campsville, and altogether, cutting the tree down and making the canoe took 18 days, which is pretty good. And the idea was to prove that you could make canoes without burning. And that's what we did. And it'll be on display in about 2 years at the new museum, or the museum at Campsville. They're moving it to higher ground. And once they do that, they'll put the canoe in there. It'll be the experimental archaeology project area. So thanks for having us. You got anything else, Bill?
I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, so you can see what we go through when we start to write a report. This is going to be quite a report eventually, but it takes years to put them out. So that was the idea. If I hadn't had this ready, we probably wouldn't have done this program because there was just so much to put out here. And I was wanting something that everybody could handle artifacts and actually get to see what you're looking at. Yeah, so.
Thanks a lot.
I want to thank Larry and Bill for doing this. Like, they're the real deal. We're lucky that we have them working with us, and so we're all lucky that they came in and gave a presentation, and nobody like them. So
Thank you.
round of applause.
All right.